author, neurosurgeon who doesn't shy away from speaking up. I'm Randall Savage, and this is Close Up. And joining us today is Miguel Faria, an author, neurosurgeon, and political activist. Welcome back to Close Up.
I'm happy to be here, Randall.
In the political arena, you've been looking at social democrats. What prompted you to take a look at that?
Because for the first time, the Democrats now have a group of democratic socialists that are openly socialist. And in the past, you know, socialism was not respectable, or people feared to be called socialist. And in fact, the word progressive has come into play, which is essentially the same thing. Now we have a trio of politicians that have become celebrities. For example, we have Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, a representative from New York, and we have Ilhan Omar, which is a representative from Minnesota, and Rashida Tlaib, who is a representative from Michigan. And they are all openly democratic socialists, which in reality they're socialists. And of course we have known about Bernie Sanders. He's one of the major contenders for the Democratic nomination. And he's being, even though he called himself an independent, he has been openly socialist. And I give him credit for that, because he called himself socialist when nobody else would. And in fact, when you measure his voting record for years, sometimes the majority of the Democrats voted the same as he did, or even more progressive than he did. So that tells you where the Democratic Party stands, especially today, calling for programs that are openly socialist. And if implemented in this country, it will destroy the United States of America. I'm sure we're going to go into detail on this, but socialism, for socialism, all you have to do is look at Nicaragua, look at Cuba, and look at Venezuela. Cuba and Venezuela were once very prosperous Latin American countries. Look where they are today. Venezuela is in shambles. People don't even have water, potable water to drink, no food. Women are selling their hairs in the street. Prostitution is rampant, because somehow you got to find a way to eat. That's what socialism has done to Venezuela.
Now, you were born in Cuba, right?
Yes.
And you came here during Fidel Castro's uprising, I guess, huh?
Well, we have a very interesting history. My family, my parents, were in the underground in the revolution, fighting to overthrow Batista. There were two groups of revolutionaries. There was the 26th of July movement that was led by Fidel and Raul Castro, and of course joined by Che Guevara. And there was a movement called the Student Revolutionary Directorate, which was began in Havana with the university students. And it was led by several other less famous people. And that's the group that my parents belonged to. It was a group that was decidedly anti-communist and will not allow socialists or communists in their groups. On the other hand, Fidel Castro's group was very quickly infiltrated by communists, including Raul Castro, who was one of the first members of the 26th of July movement to openly be a communist.
So the Social Democrats, do you see them trying to move the entire nation in that direction?
Oh, yes. I think, to me, socialism is collectivism by seduction. Communism is collectivism by force. And we're doing this in this country in an evolutionary fashion rather than a revolutionary fashion. And I may have to correct that. If the Democrats win the election in 2020, we will have a revolution, a socialist revolution in this country. Consider the Green New Deal of Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. It's been estimated to cost $45 trillion. That will mean that the national debt of this country will be triple. And if we implement socialized medicine, whether you call it Medicare for all or national health insurance, you will add another 20 trillions, which will mean they will quadruple the national debt. In addition to that, what environmentalists ought to think about is that if we do away with the internal combustion engine, and if we try to get rid of planes and get rid of cars and get rid of all of the modes of transport that we have, and we go to and we don't use fossil fuels anymore, the only thing that's left is trees. That will mean we will have to cut every tree in this planet to provide fuel for the population that we have. Where every rainforest will be devastated, will have to be cut down to provide fuel. It's essentially going back to the Stone Age. It will devastate this country, it will bankrupt this country, and any country that will follow our path will be destroyed. I am sure that China and Russia are not going to go the path of the Green New Deal. They know better. They got leaders that stand for their countries.
And of course, there are Republicans in the Senate and the House and the presidency who are not exactly doing back over flips over this themselves.
Well, I think it will be opposed very severely, and between you and me, I think that Trump is going to be reelected in 2020. So I think that is a dystopic dream that is not going to happen. But you can never be sure. The electorate is so fickle. I mean, we go from one extreme to the other. The mainstream media is so liberal that you can always
define mainstream media for me.
The mainstream media: New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, the weekly magazines. I think that's a good example right there. CBS, NBC. Now, there are exceptions. Fox, I think, is a more balanced station. I think the local stations like we're doing here today is a repository of freedom, really. The community is coming together and having shows like you and I speaking. But as far as the main and the media at large, even the internationalist media, I like the BBC. I think they do really good reporting, especially in third world nations. But when it comes to reporting United States news and even European news, they are very progressive. In other words, liberal.
Okay. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back with Close Up. Close Up, and our guest today is Miguel Faria. He's an author, a political activist, and a retired neurosurgeon. The Mueller Report, it was like 2 years in the making almost, and it's now out, but the controversy remains.
Well, I think that President Trump was correct. It's been a witch hunt. It looks as if Mueller had known that there was no collusion for some time, and he went after several associates of Trump and indicted and even had one convicted, but for other things that have nothing to do with Russia. So it becomes obvious that this was a witch hunt, a political witch hunt to get to the president, and it's going to get very deep, because I think that indeed there is a deep state, and there were members of the FBI, members of the CIA, members of the Department of Justice who collaborated with liberal journalists from some Washington Post, in fact.
So you're saying this whole thing was bogus?
Well, I wouldn't say it's all bogus. I think it started in one direction and continued as a fishing expedition. How about that? There was a starting point and became a fishing expedition, and he was correct as far as the collusion with Russia. There was no collusion, And now they say, well, Trump is not completely exonerated because there may have been charges of obstruction of justice. Well, I just read a law professor for Notre Dame University who has said that if there is no crime, there is no obstruction. How can you obstruct something when there is nothing there? In other words, no crime, no obstruction.
So basically you say that it was a bogus witch hunt and they caught no fish. They caught no fish, no witches.
Yeah,
How do you see it impacting the 2020 election, if at all?
I think that the Republicans were going to win. I think Trump is going to be reelected in 2020. Perhaps even gain several states that he lost. For example, Virginia. Look at the sex scandal and the racial scandals in Virginia. And the lieutenant governor and the governor of Virginia are still there, despite the scandal. In the state, I think Virginia may revert to the Republicans. I think New Hampshire may also revert to the Republicans. And I think the Rust Belt, Michigan, Wisconsin are going to remain in the camp of the Republicans, as will be Pennsylvania and Ohio and Florida. So I think that there is a good chance that there's going to be even a bigger majority in the Senate. And there's a possibility that Republicans may regain the House.
So basically, you look for a good Republican election in 2020?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. And I think that part of it is the Democrats, this witch hunt that they've had. People are getting sick of all these investigations that are leading nowhere. It's obvious that they are politically motivated. They have destroyed the lives of many people in being investigated. And in fact, the Republicans may turn around and start doing their own investigations. Like, for example, this deal of trying to overturn a duly elected sitting president of the United States, as they try to do, we have found out that Comey may have been involved, McCabe, FBI officials, John Brennan, the director of the CIA, Rosenstein, the deputy attorney general, they were all involved, claiming they were going to use the 25th Amendment to get rid of Trump. Well, the 25th Amendment wasn't written for getting rid of a president you don't like. It was for a president who had become either mentally or physically unable to carry on his duties, and that's definitely not the case. So Senator Lindsey Graham is the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and he has stated that he's going to have hearings about this, a failed coup d'etat.
You're going to have hearings about the hearings?
Excuse me?
You're going to have hearings about the hearings?
Well, he's going to have hearings about why were these public servants, this arrogant, sanctimonious group of public servants trying to overthrow a duly elected president of the United States.
Okay, so instead of this being over with the Mueller report coming out, it may continue on, and you see it possibly continuing on maybe into the 2020 cycle.
Well, I think the Mueller report is ended, but I think the Democrats will continue to investigate. They will continue their fishing expeditions, and I think that the Republicans may have the hearings of their own, especially with, like I mentioned, the Judiciary Committee of Senator Lindsey Graham. And I think those are an attempted coup of a sitting president of the United States is worth investigating.
Okay. All right, let's move back to the medical field here. You've had numerous medical writings, bioethics and longevity, a life not worth it after 75. The author of that concluded it, maybe not pull the plug, but just don't medicate people after age 75.
Yes.
You disagree?
I disagree. I think that there are many people that past the age of 75 who are very productive, and even if you retire, there are many things that you can do with your life. For example, if you're independent-minded and you would like to research the classics, you never had time to read all those great classics of world literature. This is a good thing to do. Another one is spending more time with your family, tending your garden, as I do. I have a garden, fruit trees, and I spend time there. And other people prefer to continue working. I have a good friend, in fact, I wrote an article about him, Al Haslam, who owns a marine in Millersville. He is 90 years old. He is still working. His son is in his 60s. You would think he's 45. They work on fixing boats. They lead a very active life. And this deal in bioethics about restricting putting a time limit in which people are no longer supposed to be productive and their life is not worth living, to me is atrocious. And it was one of the architects of Obamacare, Ezekiel Emanuel, who I debated on this in the literature. He's the one who says when you get to the age of 75, it's time to give it up, and life is not worth living anymore. Your brain doesn't work as well as you used to be. You cannot enjoy life like you used to. It's time to give it up. And I very strongly disagree with that. Obviously, this is because he wanted to save money for the state. That's really what is behind it.
And it's time for us to take a short break. We'll be right back with Close-Up. Close-Up. My guest today is Miguel Faria, and he's a political scientist, not political scientist, but a political activist, a neurosurgeon, retired, and an author.
Yes, I become a political activist every time I have a meeting with you, and I enjoy it.
Speaking of political activists, polls. The polls had it. Most all the polls, I think one in California, one somewhere else, predicted that Donald Trump was going to win. Most of the rest of them did not. And that caused political scientists to toss out this term called social desirability bias, which they say means that you're polling this person and they give you an incorrect answer because they think it'd be socially undesirable to tell the truth. Your thoughts on that?
The social undesirable, I like to use the term politically correct in those polls. And there is two interesting type of polls. One is on guns, gun ownership. There was an article in Los Angeles Times talking about that the number of households that have firearms in the United States have been greatly overestimated, that only 20% or so of homes had guns in the house. In other words, it's just that a lot of people, the people who own guns own a lot of guns, but it's only restricted to about 20% of domiciles. And this is totally incorrect. Years ago, even in the Journal of the American Medical Association, a study was done that showing that people either deliberately lie to pollsters or are disingenuous. Because in the case of guns, people do not want to admit they have guns in the house because there have been confiscation in Detroit, in California, several counties, in New York, and people are afraid that their guns will be confiscated one day. So that they found, and this has been corroborated by several other people, Professor Gary Clegg has found this out, John Lott, an economist. The reality is about 20 to 30% of answers are denying that a home has a gun when in fact there are guns in the house. And it may be higher than that depending how the question is asked. So in reality, the number of homes that have guns are probably 65 plus. And it also depends on the section of the country. You know, in the South, more people are going to have guns than they will have in Massachusetts, which probably very few homes will have guns in those states. So it depends on the geography, but also on what you call social desirability, which I call political correctness, or in fact denying something because they fear the government, like it happens in Latin America. Mm-hmm. Another type of polls that I found is in regard to Donald Trump. Donald Trump has been attacked so savagely by the media, and he has been so politically incorrect that when you're asking questions about what do you think Trump's job is, his job approval rating is going to be low because people are expected that's what they are supposed to say. It's been found that many times people respond in a way that they want to agree with the pollsters. And a lot of the pollsters, you and I know, are liberal. I can only think of a Rasmussen pollster that is somewhat neutral. But polls are not scientific. And that's why the victory of Donald Trump was not expected in many quarters. I thought he was going to win. I told my wife he was going to win, and he won. Because people are going to tell whatever they think the pollster want them to say in at least 30% of cases.
So that social desirability or political correctness, either way you want to call it, you see it working?
Yes, it absolutely is correct. I agree with the political scientists on that.
So do you think that's going to spill over in 2020?
I think that's still going to spill over in 2020.
And you think that the pollsters will be, that they'll be coming in with polls showing Trump losing, but you think he's going to win?
I think that until the very end, unless there is a big change between the next 2 years, Trump is going to be seen as the loser candidate, but in the end, he will win again in 2020, unless something totally unexpected takes place.
In gerrymandering election districts, there's a move afoot now to, I think the U.S. Supreme Court may be going to, certainly one of the federal appellate courts are going to be looking at that gerrymandering election districts to suit a particular party. Do you see that as a major factor in 2020?
You mean the courts intervening?
If they issue a ruling that says no gerrymandering and cause redistricting lines?
I think that probably won't have that much of an impact.
Okay.
Gerrymandering can do only so much. You can gerrymander districts as much as you want, but I think there is so much you can do. The big cities where the population is very dense has been found to be more liberal than rural areas where the population density is less, probably because those are people who want to be independent, the old rugged individualism, and they tend to be conservative. But it's very, you have to really form a salamander to get all those districts together and for political purposes. I don't think that will be a big factor.
Okay. Almost 3 decades ago, you were involved in an accuracy in media convention. What was that?
That was when we visited El Salvador. I think you're referring to that. We went. We felt that the reporting of the news coming from El Salvador were very biased. For example, you will always hear the right-wing death squads, but you never heard the left-wing death squads. And we wanted to find out what was going on in El Salvador.
Were there two of them, right and left?
Yes, I think there was so much violence that there was violence coming from the right and the left. Yes, and it was not properly reported that was the case. That what we heard in the United States was that right-wing squads were killing people, and in fact the FMLN, which was the Marxist guerrilla, was fighting, they were trying to overthrow the government, when were killing, they had a campaign to kill government officials throughout El Salvador. Dozens of mayors, and this, I'm talking about in villages. There were maybe 300, 400 people, and the elders of those villages were killed if they did not supply young men to join the FMLN. Now, we don't hear much about El Salvador because the communists were defeated, and they finally came to the table, and they now form a government, and El Salvador is doing well, except for the criminal gangs that are.
We're out of time.
Oh no.
It's always good to have you. I'm Randall Savage. See you next time on Close Up.